Before you say anything, I am well aware that Black History Month was last month. But considering that March 10th is Harriet Tubman Day in the United States, I'd argue that March is the perfect time to release this video. I mean, everybody celebrates Harriet Tubman Day, right? The 2019 biopic, Harriet, chronicles the life of Harriet Tubman, a Black abolitionist and conductor on the Underground Railroad. A series of secret routes and safe houses established to lead enslaved people to freedom in the period leading up to the American Civil War. After escaping to freedom in Philadelphia, Harriet decided to return to Maryland to rescue her remaining family, freeing an estimated 300 people along the way. She then joined the Union Army as a volunteer during the American Civil War, before retiring to her home in Auburn, New York, where she opened up a nursing home for elderly African Americans. Honestly, the number of things this woman achieved is incredible and a little intimidating. But is Harriet an accurate representation of her life? Let's take a look and find out. Despite a few changes and a bit of padding, which I'll talk about later, the film still manages to provide a fairly accurate overview of the most important events in Harriet Tubman's life, including Harriet's time living as a slave on the Bordes plantation in Dorchester County, Maryland, and the fact that she was originally named Arminta, aka Minty, her marriage to John Tubman, a free black man, and the discovery that her family had been cheated out of their freedom, which, according to the will of her mother's first owner, should have been granted upon her mother's 65th birthday. Harriet's heartfelt plea to God to kill her master in an effort to avoid being sold south, the death of Harriet's master, Edward Bordes, on March 7, 1849, and Harriet's belief that she may have been partially responsible. Harriet's decision to try and escape north to freedom, and the song that she sang to her family informing them of her plans. I'm gonna leave you. The over 100-mile journey to Pennsylvania, and Harriet's friendship with William Still, a Black abolitionist who worked for the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society. William Still's habit of recording the stories of runaway slaves, and the fact that Harriet was illiterate. The revelation that Harriet's success in escaping slavery was due largely to messages she received from God, an ability which she believed may have been connected to a childhood head injury. Harriet's decision to return to Maryland to free her family, only to discover that her husband had remarried. Harriet's successful career as a conductor on the Underground Railroad earning her the nickname Moses. The issuing of the Fugitive Slave Act on September 18, 1850, which stipulated that escaped slaves living in the free states of Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, New York, and California could be arrested and returned to slavery once captured. Harriet's relocation to St. Catharines, Ontario to escape said Fugitive Slaves Act, and the large number of bounties placed on her head by irate slave owners. The daring rescue of Harriet's parents, Rit and Ben Ross, who, though free, were in danger of being arrested for aiding fugitive slaves. And finally, Harriet's participation in the Combahee River Raid, which resulted in the freedom of over 700 enslaved people. While I have to acknowledge that this film does an excellent job accurately conveying a ton of information about Harriet Tubman, as the saying goes, the devil is in the details. While it's true that Thomas Garrett was a member of the Underground Railroad, The role he plays in the film, transporting a weak and weary Harriet to the Pennsylvania border, is not historically accurate. According to her own account, Harriet first met Garrett around 1852, over 2 years after her arrival in Pennsylvania, at which point he became one of her stockholders, donating funds and resources to aid her during her trips to Maryland. While it's true that Harriet first met William Still after relocating to Philadelphia, unlike in the film, it's unknown exactly when or how the pair first met. The story of Harriet's childhood head injury is also altered slightly for the film, as according to Scenes in the Life of Harriet Tubman, an autobiography dictated by Harriet, rather than defending her older brother, Harriet was injured while protecting a runaway slave from the nearby Barrett plantation. When the slave was found, the overseer swore he should be whipped, and called on Harriet, among others, to help tie him. She refused, and as the man ran away, she placed herself in the door to stop pursuit. The overseer caught up a 2-pound weight from the counter and threw it at the fugitive, but it fell short and struck Harriet a stunning blow on the head. Just like in the film, this near-death experience left Harriet suffering from blinding headaches, narcolepsy, and, according to Harriet, the occasional telepathic communication from God. While the film is correct that Harriet's first rescue mission took place in 1850, she didn't actually return to Maryland until 1851. The rescue mission depicted in the film is also an amalgamation of story elements taken from several of Harriet's adventures. While Harriet reconnected with her husband during her first trip back to Maryland in 1851, freeing 10 slaves after he refused to go with her, it wasn't until the Christmas of 1853 that she was able to free her brothers, John, William Henry, and Benjamin. With that being said, this scene does reference several minor historical details, including William Henry's fiancée, Catherine, disguising herself as a man to escape her plantation, the reluctance of Harriet's brother John to leave his pregnant wife, Harriet's father, Ben Ross, blindfolding himself so, if questioned, he could report that he hadn't seen his children, and the fact that Harriet was not above threatening her passengers to keep them from turning back. Dead niggers tell no tales, as Harriet liked to say. While on the subject of Harriet's family, I should probably mention that the film's depiction of John Tubman, Harriet's husband, is not very historically accurate, though the film portrays John as a kind and supportive spouse who is separated from Harriet by forces beyond his control. In reality, John Tubman not only refused to go with Harriet to Philadelphia, but even threatened to report her plans to the Bordes family if she didn't agree to stay. Kind of a dick move. Though considering he was later murdered in cold blood and his murderer was never even prosecuted, I find it hard to stay mad at him. Despite providing a fairly historically accurate portrayal of Harriet Tubman's life, the film has an entire cast of fictionalized characters, including Gideon Bordes, Bigger Long, Mary Buchanan, Walter, and Reverend Green. While I can't really blame the filmmakers for this, as these characters help to fill several holes in Harriet Tubman's rather murky history, as someone who reviews historical media, I'm honor-bound to discuss them. Though Harriet's master, Edward Bordes, was reported to have had 8 children, it's unlikely that Harriet was close with any of them, as starting when she was about 5, she was rented out to work for neighboring landowners. The Bordes household was often in debt, and renting out slaves provided an extra source of revenue, while freeing the owners of the financial obligation of feeding and clothing their slaves. This being said, Harriet's interaction with Gideon provides a look into the mindset of a slave owner, as well as some of the common justifications they use for defending slavery. Not unlike Gideon, many pro-slavery advocates believed that slaves were their mental inferiors, and were therefore better suited to a life of menial labor. Probably the best example of this method of thinking comes to us from Senator James Henry Hammond, author of the mudsill theory, which posits that in every society there must be an underclass of people dedicated to performing menial labor, thus freeing up the more intelligent members of society to work towards the advancement of civilization, thus proving that success and higher education doesn't always prevent someone from becoming a colossal dumbass. Reverend Green, a kindly old man who helps Harriet to escape slavery, is another fictionalized character, though it is true that Harriet was helped on her journey to Philadelphia by members of the Maryland Quaker community, a religious organization that denounced slavery in 1776. According to one account, after escaping the Bordas plantation, Harriet found refuge with a local Quaker woman, who, in exchange for one of Harriet's favorite quilts, provided her with supplies and safe passage out of town. While the validity of this story is questionable, especially considering that Harriet's autobiography bears no mention of it, it's true that many members of the Quaker community aided runaway slaves, and that Harriet's home county of Dorchester had a fairly sizable Quaker population. Bigger Long, a black slave catcher, though technically a fictional character, isn't completely historically inaccurate, as black slave catchers, though rare, did exist. While this may be hard to believe, it's important to keep in mind that most free black men would have probably had a difficult time obtaining paid employment, especially in the Deep South, and slave catching was an incredibly lucrative line of work, with some slave owners offering rewards of upwards of $1,000. A bit ironic, considering these same slave owners weren't willing to pay people to work their fields, further proof that wealth and intelligence don't necessarily go hand in hand. Though the film is right in asserting that Harriet Tubman's older sister, Rachel, died while she was still a slave, it wasn't until 1860, 3 years after the rescue of Harriet's parents, that she learned of her sister's death. Despite multiple rescue attempts, Rachel refused to leave without her children, Ben and Anger, who had been hired out to work on another plantation. After learning of her sister's death, Harriet made one last attempt to rescue her niece and nephew, though it seems she was unsuccessful. To be honest, I much prefer the movie's interpretation of events. The film's depiction of the Combahee River campaign, while not historically inaccurate per se, is a brief depiction of what is actually a very significant moment in Harriet Tubman's history. So I'm going to be providing a bit more context. After the start of the American Civil War in 1861, Harriet Tubman joined the Union Army as a volunteer, working as a laundress, nurse, and eventually the head of aspiring. Using the information gathered from her spies along the Combahee River, Harriet, along with Colonel James Montgomery, commander of the 2nd South Carolina Volunteers, planned a raid to take up the torpedoes placed by the rebels in the river, destroy railroads and bridges, and cut off supplies from the rebel troops. While Harriet's account of events seems to imply that freeing slaves was not the primary objective of her campaign, as the gunboats traveled up the river, they were swarmed by a mob of people intent on escaping the plantations. However, with so many people trying to board the rowboats all at once, many became worried that they were going to be left behind, and began clinging onto the boats to stop them from leaving. In an effort to stem their anxiety, Harriet, under suggestion from Colonel Montgomery, decided to lead the group in a rousing song, which distracted the crowd long enough to get everybody on board. Though Harriet's exact contributions to the Combahee River campaign are a bit unclear, depending on the source, the number of men under her control ranges from 150 to several. She is still credited as the first woman in the history of the United States to command troops during a military campaign, an important accomplishment that I'm glad the film didn't overlook. This film is a milestone in the history of cinema, not just because it records the story of one of history's most famous black heroines, though this is definitely important, but because of how accurately it strives to represent Harriet's life and experiences. In an interview, the film's director referenced how media tends to represent Harriet as a grandmotherly figure, often glossing over other elements of her story in the process. By contrast, this film depicts Harriet as the nuanced and complicated person that she was. Intelligent, stubborn, courageous, kind-hearted, and at times even a bit violent, which is exactly how history should be represented. Well, as always, I'm Silver Jade, asking you to please remember to support your local library. Seriously, I would not be able to make these videos without it, and I hope to see you again next time.